Today's video is about the organization of organisms. Okay, so living things are organized. You are an organism, and you have things that make up you, and then you have things that make up those things, and then things that make up those things that make up those things that make up you. So if you break down your body, you can actually break it down by layer, from largest and most complex, which is you, the organism, down, all the way down to the simplest component that makes up you, which is the atom. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the things that I want you to know before you go are these four things right here. One, I want you to know what are the levels of biological classification. Two, what is the difference between the levels? Three, what levels do blood and skin belong in? Because those are kind of tricky. And four, what are xylem and phloem? So let's get started. So let's start off with the first one. What are the levels of organization? So if we start with the organism, organisms are made up of many different organ systems working together. These organ systems are made up of different organs working together. So if we say the organism, that's like you. Let me pause for a second. I'm going to go back up here just to give an example of what each of these are. An organism is like you. An organ system would be like your digestive system. That's one of your many systems that work together to make up the organism. These are all examples, okay? An organ, so an organ that would be in that digestive system, a pretty easy one would be the stomach. Organs are made up of tissues. Now, there's four different kinds of tissues that make up the human body. But one of the types of tissues, there's a couple of different kinds of tissues that make up the stomach, but they all work together. There are muscle tissue and epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is like outer tissue that covers the outside of something or surrounds the outside of something or forms a barrier between that thing and something else. Your stomach is lined on the inside with this epithelial tissue that separates the stomach itself from the acid that is in your stomach. And your stomach does have muscles, not skeletal muscles like your biceps, but smooth muscles that do contract and relax to squish the food inside your stomach to help it to digest and break down. So there's different kinds of tissues working together to form the organ, the stomach, which is part of the digestive system, which is one of the systems that makes up you. Now, tissues are made up of different kinds of cells working together. Cells are made up of different organelles that work together to make up the cell. Organelles are made up of molecules, and molecules are made up of atoms. And I'm running out of room down here on the board. But below atoms are protons, neutrons, and electrons. Okay, we learned about that in the past as well. So when you put protons, neutrons, electrons together, you get atoms. When you put atoms together, you get molecules. When you put molecules together, I could actually have put macromolecules in here because smaller molecules, when you put them together, make big or macro, the opposite of micro, which is small, macro, which is big, macromolecules. Macromolecules together make up organelles, which put together make up cells. When you put cells together, you get tissues. When you put tissues together, you get organs. When you put organs together, you get organ systems. And when you put organ systems together, you get an organism. Okay, so it goes from largest and most complex at the top, and then you break it down into simpler and simpler components, until you get to the smallest and least complex down here at the bottom. Okay? So those are the levels of organization of an organism. And you, like I said, are an example of an organism. So let's talk about blood. So what is blood? This is thing number 2 that I want you to know before you go. So blood, you may think of blood as just this one thing, like your red blood cells, the red stuff that comes out when you get cut. But actually, your blood is made up of 4 components, okay? So I'm going to do this over here. So the 4 components that make up blood are actually red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma, and platelets. Okay? So red blood cells are like, imagine you have a river. The river would be like the plasma, okay? And if you've ever floated in an inner tube in the river and just floated down the stream, that inner tube that's floating in the stream is like a red blood cell. Let's say there's red ones that are red blood cells, and let's say there's also white inner tubes floating in this down this stream, and those would represent white blood cells. Okay, so you have a stream of plasma, and in that stream you have red inner tubes and white inner tubes. Red blood cells floating in the stream, being carried by the stream, and white blood cells also being carried by the stream. Platelets are another thing. Those are the sticky globs that whenever you get cut, they gunk up the opening of the cut to prevent blood from coming out and stops the bleeding, and that dries and forms a scab. Okay? So blood, when we say blood, we're not talking about one thing. We're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4 different things that are working together to accomplish a mission. And because we have multiple cells working together, you may think blood is a cell, but blood is actually a tissue. Why? Because it's made up of multiple cells working together, and that's what tissues are. Tissues are made up of multiple cells working together, multiple different kinds of cells working together. Okay? So blood is a tissue. It's important that you know that. What about skin? Okay, so skin, you may think that skin is a tissue, but you would be wrong. Okay? Your skin is actually an organ. In fact, it's the largest organ on your body. The average person's skin weighs about 20 pounds, okay? Which is about 6 times bigger or heavier than your next largest organ, which is your liver, okay? So now, skin is an organ because it's made up of multiple tissues. Remember, everything in this level is made up of things in the level, all the levels below it. So because skin is actually multiple tissues working together, it's considered an organ. There's 3 different tissues that work together to make up the skin organ. There's the outside, middle, and inside layer. If you've ever heard of getting burns, like 3rd degree burns, 1st degree burns, that's why they're called 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degree burns, is because 1st degree burns cover just the first layer of skin, your outermost layer of skin, like a sunburn. 2nd degree burns burn the 1st and the 2nd. 3rd degree burns burn the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd layers of skin. So we have 3 layers of tissues that make up the skin, and because we have multiple different kinds of tissues working together, it must make it the thing above it, which is an organ. Okay, last thing is we're going to kind of go in a different direction here. We've been talking about the human body. Now we're going to talk about a tree. So plants also have these same things. So they have, this is the organism, and the organism is made up of organ systems, made up of tissues, or organs, tissues, stuff like that, okay? So plants are no different. So the only thing that you need to know about plants is that there are two things called xylem and phloem. Now, xylem and phloem are just like your blood vessels. They are things that carry water and food from the root of the tree all the way up to the tippy top, okay? So there's two different kinds, just like you have arteries and veins, plants have xylem and phloem. So xylem carries water, phloem carries food. Oop, that's supposed to be an E, phloem. And these two are tissues. Why are they tissues? Because when you put them together, they make up an organ, and when you break them down simpler, they're made up of different kinds of cells. Okay, so that's the layer that they're in. And that's everything you need to know.